Good afternoon, everyone. In my time zone, it is 5 o'clock, so I am on Eastern time zone. We're at the top of the hour, and I'm going to go ahead and get us started. David Lutz, our curriculum specialist, he is here. You just can't see him, so you'll be hearing his voice here in a moment. There he is. So you can see David right there in a little quick snapshot, but I'll do some housekeeping before we get started, and then we'll just roll with it. So again, thank you all for being here for our sixth Shurley English Teacher Talk, and we are just really having a good time enjoying the conversation that we have, interacting with you guys. So I want to encourage you, feel free to interact. How do you do that? You have a questions box. So you have a questions bubble with a question mark at the top of your screen in the menu panel. If you click on that, you can type in any questions that you would like, or if we ask a question, you can respond and reply in there. There is a chat box. I'd like you to try and avoid the chat box. It's right next to the questions bubble. So stay in the questions bubble, then your questions will be answered pretty immediately. Okay, and then if you've got some audio issues or something going on, sometimes it helps to log out, log back in. You can also go to the settings icon and dial in by phone if you are using your computer and your computer audio shuts out. We know all about those technical difficulties because we work through them as well. So, all right, without further ado, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Kimberly Crady. I am one of the national consultants for Shurley Instructional Materials. And I live, as you can see, I live in the state of Florida. And my partner here, Mr. David Lutz, is our curriculum specialist, and he is out of Missouri. So I'm going to hand it over to you, David, if you want to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you, Kimberly. Hi, everyone. Again, I apologize that you can't see me, but it's actually a blessing for you anyway. So I will tell you just a little bit about myself. I've been working with Shurley for a very long time now, about 20 years. And that's both as a classroom teacher and now also working as part of the company. And it's been very exciting to see how this curriculum the whole theme behind what we've been doing is everything old is new again. And I think that Shurley English is one of those curriculum that one of those types of curricula that actually fits that bill. It's really true. Because the tenets of language arts, the tenets of English, they don't change over time. Now, some of the rules might be restated a little differently, but the fact is it's pretty consistent. And what Shurley English does, it teaches language arts in such a way that if you were learning another language, a foreign language, you would have to break it down in pieces. You would work very directly with the language. And that's what Shurley has done in the classroom again, and that hasn't happened for a very, very long time. Many years have passed since English, for English-speaking and non-English-speaking people, that traditional way of instructing it has changed over time, even though the tenets haven't. And as you can see, that does create a problem. What's typically been happening is it becomes just a piece or a part of a language arts program, and Shurley just doesn't do that. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to say that to you is because I want you to know that if you're new joining us in these live talks, you need to understand just a little bit about what we've been doing. And we won't spend a lot of time reviewing, but you should take a look. Let's just go to our next slide. And I'm looking at the one that says novelty. And since I'm kind of on my own here a little bit, except for my phone call, I just want to talk to you a little bit about each of the areas you see on the Making the Connection wheel. And if you were with us last time, we talked about novelty as fuel for focus, creativity, and retention. And one of the things we want you to understand is that when you teach a program like Shurley, you're already bringing in novelty to the way that has become what is now traditional in English instruction. We don't even have a class called that in a lot of elementary classrooms or junior high classrooms anymore. And What I think is novel about it is because of the pillars of instruction that we've talked about before, where we want to make sure we start with jingles, which front loads information about all the parts of speech and various composition skills, writing skills, and it puts it to a tune or a rhythm that the brain wants to hang on to. And then we move on into the question and answer flow, which is very specific to Shurley English. And it also front loads information, but it allows kids the opportunity to parse sentences or to classify sentences as if they were diagramming a sentence, except that now the sentence remains in a linear fashion. And they are learning that there are lots of jobs for a noun, and there are several ways that they can operate within a sentence, and that is unique to any of the curricula available to teach English. And I love it when I get to work with nouns doing all the different noun jobs that they have. And when we talk about jingles and the Q&A flow and the sentence blueprints, that's the next step. That's the third pillar of instruction that leads us into writing composition. Now, that's just a quick review for you if you're coming along new. Now, if you've been a part of what we've already been doing, our last session talked about novelty. And so let's go to the slide that just has the frog leaping off the lily pad, because I love that this is our starting point. And Kimberly, I'm going to let you get started and get it in edgewise too. I can't see your face or anything, but I just want to make sure that you see the progression of what we're going to try to talk about today, because our last session was a wonderful springboard for extending the lesson. And a lot of times there might be some confusion about what that really is. Enrichment, and that, again, can get a little confusing for some people, but we also want to talk about differentiated instruction and how novelty becomes a sort of the seedbed for all of these types of strategies and also extensions that we're going to discuss today. Now, I want to talk a little bit about John Medina, who's a brain guy, and I love what he writes. He writes so very simply, but one of the things he talks about is something we brought out last time. Humans don't pay attention to boring things. And that's true. I mean, it sounds like that's like a big duh, but the truth is, who wants to invest time? I was going to say spend time, but no, it's more about an investment, because time is, it's kind of a big deal these days, and it's getting to be more so. But the reality is there's always been the same amount of time every day, but it's how we divide our attention up in that day that makes all the difference. And you as instructors, all of us as teachers, we know that we have a very limited amount of instructional time that's really quality time that we can spend with our kids. We need to make it count. And if you would just remember this important key, humans don't pay attention to boring things. Now, Kimberly, if you want to jump right on in there everywhere, this next one that I want to talk about, it's by John Medina. It's Brain Rule 3. Do you want to say anything about that? Because I know that you have a different brain.
Yes, I do have a different brain. I attribute it to one of my strengths. So I have a tendency, or my brain has a tendency, to see the bigger picture first. And so when I work, it's nice to have somebody like David, because when we work together, I see this big, huge picture, but he can help me kind of rein it in and I'm zooming out, and then I have to zoom back in and get down to the nitty gritty. So this is what I was told one time by a health teacher, in fact. Men's brains are like waffles. They're able to compartmentalize a lot better than a female's brain. And females' brains are like spaghetti, and everything just runs together, but we find the connections between everything. And I could relate to that because I'm not really good at putting things over here in these like nice tiny little boxes. I wish I could. It looks very organized. But once again, like I said, one of my number one strengths is connection. So I see how all things are connected, which allows me as a teacher to practice novelty and extend the lesson. Just give me a concept to teach, and I'll find all kinds of ways to connect what my activity is to that main topic or that standard or whatever it is that I am supposed to be teaching. So I was one of those teachers in the 5th grade that I just was full of ideas, and I'd like to get outside the box. My brain likes novel things. I get bored easily. So if I'm getting bored easily, I can imagine my students would get bored easily as well. That's what I loved about teaching Shurley English, is it was so interactive. You can't really get bored with it because you're moving, you're seeing, you're saying it, you're hearing it, you're doing it, you're using your senses. And I think using your senses is a huge, huge piece in creating,
absolutely,
extending the lesson and really bringing in that novelty and enrichment, because all of that allows and it creates this opportunity for enrichment and then ultimately differentiation. So yes, reel me back in, David, because I'm all over the place now. My brain just went spaghetti on me.
I love that. It's a really good picture, and I think it's true. Of course, let's just throw an axiom out there. Everybody is different. Again, just like what we were saying, every brain is wired differently. But now that doesn't necessarily mean that there are any two brains alike, male or female. It does not really make much difference in the fact that we all can approach any kind of problem, any kind of a situation that's going to make us think through. We will all probably have a different way to do it. Now that doesn't really surprise anybody, I don't think. However, let's back that up just a little bit, because typically as instructors, we are handed curriculum. We're told, this is what you're going to teach. These are your standards. Here are your objectives. This is what you have to do. Now, what are we supposed to do with that? All of a sudden now, it's incumbent upon the teacher to say, well, yeah, but I think about that differently. Okay, do. Absolutely do, because you're going to. You can't stop yourself from doing it. However, you need a flexible curriculum that allows you to do that. And Shurley is one of those programs that, to be honest, it's probably one of the first teachers of mine that really got my brain going in that direction, where I was able to be as creative as I wanted to be. And I was fairly creative as a teacher in the other subjects anyway. I just wanted to be that way. That was the way I operated. However, when you're told this is what you have to do and this is how much time you have to do it in, it leaves it to the teacher to question, how am I going to do that? How am I going to get all of that done? There's a lot to do. And in fact, there's probably more to do now than there ever was before. And so we're saying now we need you to also extend your lesson, enrich that lesson. Not only that, we want you to make sure that you differentiate the way you teach it. I'm not going to tell you how. I just need you to do it. And that's a lot of pressure. And I know that every teacher who's listening in or watching is probably saying, yeah, I already know all this. I know this, and this is hard. We get it. But here's where I want you to go. Let's go to the slide that has brain rule number 12. We are powerful and natural explorers. That's where we are all the same. And if we know that about our kids, if we know that and we know it's true about our kids, that should really give us big clues as to what we're going to do when it comes to extending a lesson. Now, let's go ahead and move to purpose and content focus. Let's talk just a little bit about that. I believe it's slide 8 for you all. So, Kimberly, when we talk about extending a lesson, what does it do here? It aims to deepen understanding of core concepts. And right there, that's a lot. To deepen the understanding, while enrichment exercises provide additional challenges or experiences. So do you see the difference? Extending the lesson, we're trying to get in a little deeper as far as all of the concepts you've been teaching. making sure that students know them inside and out, upside down, front, back. But enrichment then provides additional challenges. That's why it becomes challenging for teachers, I think, because there's really not a lot of time to add extra things to the lesson. So our goal is, how do we do that as part of our regular teaching routine? How can we actually accomplish that? And we're going to talk about those ideas today. And we're going to hopefully leave all of you with some ideas that you can try and immediately take into your classroom and think about, okay, so I think I can do what I've always been doing, but I can maybe switch it up a little bit. Look at this content focus here. Lesson extensions often revisit and elaborate on existing material. Enrichment introduces new topics or skills. Again, the difference, we're talking about kids who now understand a concept. They've taught, or they've been learning it. You've taught it well. And now we're going to say, okay, kids, I'm handing it over to you. I want you to take this knowledge that you have, and now you have to apply it somehow. And I want to give you a level of freedom so that you can create whatever it is you feel like you can do with that knowledge. And of course, you as the teacher now, that sort of changes your role, doesn't it? We've often used the phrases, well, at least I do, that teachers can be that sage on the stage. And I hope all of you out here have heard this. But there's also the other side of that, which is being the guide on the side. And I really love getting to that place with kids. And as we talk about lesson extensions and enrichment and differentiated instruction, you really do you allow yourself the opportunity to move into that role. When look at what we're talking about on student engagement, I think that's the next slide. Extensions may involve more practice or application of learned skills, and enrichment encourages exploration and creativity. So when you can get students really engaged, and of course we talked about how bored everybody can get with the same old thing. But when you are now opening the door for their creativity to speak up and to show up, then you maybe have less responsibility as far as writing it all into your lesson plans. I'm hopefully going to impart to you today ways that you don't necessarily have to be the genius here, and you have to figure out all of your extensions and all of your enrichment and then all your differentiated instruction on your own. You don't have to do that. I would like to assert that maybe your kids might be the key. Maybe their exploration, maybe their creativity is the key that will unlock that door in your classroom. Now, again, let's not forget about assessment. Often, including assessments, what you're trying to do is find out, okay, do these kids really understand what I've been doing? I mean, I've been teaching this and teaching this and teaching this. I've been trying to vary my instruction. I'm hoping that their performance is going to show that they really have a deep understanding. But when do you know they know it? Look at the last line here. When they're focused on personal interest and self-directed learning. And when I've always felt like this, Kimberly, that if kids can teach another kid in the classroom something that they know, they really know that content, at least that content that they're trying to impart to a friend. And I don't think that's news either. That shouldn't be new to any teacher. If you will allow your students to learn how to explore and explain what they now know, they can be tremendous instructors in the classroom as well, leading the way for extended lessons. It'll give you an idea as an instructor what to do. And enriching that lesson, you know how that works out when all of a sudden you're standing there in front of the classroom, or you're moving around in the classroom, and you get an idea. And what I would encourage every one of you to do is don't keep that idea to yourself. The moment it hits your brain, that's the time to speak up and say, hey, everybody, wait a minute, I just got a thought. And then you get that out there, because once you start to model how you're going to access your brain, it's an amazing thing for kids to start to pick up on that too, and they'll start to do it too. All right, so Kimberly, would you like to talk just a little bit about the next, I'll just call it phrase or comment?
And before I do that, I would like to bring in just one comment, and it might take us down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but Now, as I'm hearing you say all this, David, it sounds beautiful, right?
Oh yeah.
And I know what kind of brain I'm working with. I know what kind of a risk taker I am. But I don't know if all teachers are willing to actually take this risk, because this feels risky, right?
Okay.
When it's not always what you're supposed to do. I'm using little quotes, little air quotes.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
It feels like a risk. Like I would be taking a risk.
Sure.
And so can you kind of help us get through that? And how do you get over that hump of feeling like this is too risky for me? I'm just going to stick to what the book says. We're going to go page by page, and we're just going to do this.
Yeah.
And do it the same way.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely think it feels risky, but I can also testify that if you're still teaching the standards that you're required to teach in your state, your school, your district, if you are still meeting those objectives, you're still writing your lesson plans, you're still including all the activities and engaging activities that you want to do with your kids, I would tell you that you're not really risking anything that, let's just say it this way, you're not going to be in trouble, because I think great educators will do these things. But personally speaking, for your own personal safety, if you're used to having, to follow a guide so carefully, and I would say that in Shurley, we strongly encourage you to do that. Absolutely, follow the guide. But after you taught it for a year or two, after that, the door to freedom opens very, very widely. And you are then free to explore all types of extended lessons and enriching lessons and differentiated instruction. But if you're feeling personally that it's too hard, sometimes it's really just because it's so new to you. Yeah. It's not the way you've always done it. And so you do have to weigh in on that decision for yourself. If you're not comfortable doing certain things, by all means, wait until you are a little more comfortable doing it. But let's really get honest. All you need are some good ideas. All it takes is just a few little activity ideas that maybe you didn't think of, or that maybe somebody's tried over and over again, and you said, "Nah, we don't do that." What if you did? Why not just try it? You're not going to lose your kids, I promise you, because any novel approach you take to what you're doing, your kids are going to go, "What? All right, I like that. That's going to be interesting." And I think that we have to just remember this. All brains are wired differently, and all brains want to explore and discover. So you're probably not taking as big a risk as you think.
Yeah. And I'll add on to that. Ask yourself this question. Have I created an atmosphere in my classroom where I am able and willing to take a risk? Have you created an atmosphere in your classroom where you, as the teacher, are willing to take a risk? Okay. Now answer this question. Have you created a classroom environment where your students feel safe enough to take a risk? Because if you don't feel safe enough taking risks, I guarantee you your students won't feel safe enough either. Hence, here we go. Lesson extension, enrichment, and differentiation begin when students think differently about what they already know. You and I both all know this. You are always the model. So when they see you taking these risks and being a human and not being perfect, they're going to engage in these risky endeavors.
Well, they're new avenues. They're new avenues. Yeah. If you go to your next slide, I love this. It's a new trail. It's a new way. You want to talk about that just a little bit?
Yes. So, as I told you, my brain is spaghetti, and I love to just get outside of the box, okay? I see it one way, I see what I'm supposed to do, but I also see all these other ways that we can do it. And I was the type of teacher where I wasn't going to be the one up there doing all the talking. I wanted my students to be engaged in the learning process. I wasn't there to just be a lecturer. And you know, if you're teaching elementary, you know that you can't just be a lecturer up there. And if you're teaching middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th, I'd encourage you, those kids are a lot like your first and second graders. They need you to keep them engaged. So this is how I approached the writing process. So I know that you're not able to see everything on here, but I do want to go through here. For confidentiality purposes, I would have clothespins with numbers on them, and each number was associated with a student, and they knew their numbers. So the pencil represents the writing process, and then each part of the pencil has a different step in the writing process. So as you can see, there are some clothespins there. Some people are in pre-writing, some people are in the rough draft, and you can see some are also in the publishing stage. So you could see how the students you become guide by the side when you've already established the foundation, you've already walked them through the writing process, but this becomes an extension of the lesson, enrichment too, and allows for differentiation as well. So you've got the writing process, and then you've also got the trail of traits, which coincide with our traits of effective writers.
Sure.
And then you have some different writing prompts and some different adverbs and adjectives in these folders down there. And so those can be ideas too. And so all of this is to help your students work their way through the writing process. Once they get to the publishing stage or step in the writing process, then they move on to Author's Avenue. And then they will be able to publish their work. Now, maybe they're publishing via a PowerPoint that they have created and by presentation mode, or maybe their publishing is that they're going to place their paper up on the bulletin board here. So this is something that is really good after you have already gone through the writing process. You know the value of the writing process, therefore your students know the value of the writing process, and this becomes novel to them. This, although you're not teaching them anything different, what you are allowing them to do is to step into a more independent activity where they can keep track of their own organization and where they're at in this process. And I just think it gives students that freedom. You're always there, guide by the side if they need some help. But when they're ready, I think this is a great way to let them go. You have to let them go and fumble and fail and be adventurous, because you never really fail. You're just continuously learning and exploring. And going on, and you just go through the cycle again and again. And the writing process is no different in my mind.
Sure. Would you go ahead and talk about another extension of, and just, it does get a little interesting, because if you move into your classroom cafe, when you talk about that, and I love your display here, but when you talk about, an extension of the lesson, I think this is a beautiful way to extend it. But I also think it's a beautiful way to enrich it, and largely because you are dealing with individual student writing, and this is, I guess, a platform, right? Wouldn't you call that a platform for your kids to maybe get some of their ideas out there? How would you explain this to everybody?
So
it looks like
the cafe, the cafe chat is a part of, well, let me backtrack. How many of you enjoy going to a coffee shop? I mean, as teachers, you probably don't get to go to the coffee shop. But if you close your eyes and imagine what it would be to wake up in the morning on a Wednesday and you're like, you know what? I feel like reading a book, but I want to go smell the aroma in a coffee shop and the ambiance, the dim lights and the lo-fi music that's playing in the background. It really gets me into whatever vibe you're feeling, right? So if you can imagine that, it's calm most of the time. If you're reading, or I like to go there and do some work like writing or whatever. But imagine if you could create this in your own classroom. You have a special corner, or you have a special day even. Maybe you have the Friday cafe day. And what you do is you create a cafe atmosphere in your classroom. And you allow the student, maybe you have hot chocolate in there, hot cider or something, and make it special for them. All you have to do is make something a little bit different. So I can extend the lesson here and allow what I'm going to do here in the cafe chat is actually have somebody read a piece of writing. And then we get together in groups, okay? And then you can discuss it. I mean, there's endless ideas to this cafe chat. If you go to the next slide, you're going to see what's actually written on the individual. These are reflection papers. And so in the cafe with the dim lights and the nice smells and the soothing, calming music, that's when you're creating an atmosphere where your students can be calm. They can actually reflect upon whatever it is they read, whatever it is they wrote, whatever they heard. So this idea is just something that you could do once a month even to make it even more novel, because weekly is going to become more of a habit. If you bring it in, it can also be used as incentive for, classroom management as well. But I think this is a fun idea that can be implemented right away. It can be with any subject. I mean, your classroom cafe doesn't have to be just about English language arts and reading. I mean, you can pull in all the different subjects, science, social studies, all of it. And then this reflection page is to me an extension of journaling. It's guided journaling, if you will.
Sure.
And so when you look at this paper, you can see that it's guided. And I don't know about you, if you've ever had a guided journal, they're kind of fun because it's like you get half and half. You don't have to do all of the thinking, but it starts to get the wheels spinning with whatever it is that they're asking you, whatever question it is that they're asking you. So that's why I like the Classroom Cafe.
I love that. And I don't know, I since I don't have access to the questions, does anybody else do something like this in your classroom right now? And if you don't, could you take some of the writing that the students have been doing throughout the year and still maybe implement this? Because we're late in the year and extensive writing projects may not necessarily be on the agenda because we're probably getting close to test time and what have you. But could you see yourselves using this type of an extension to create maybe a greater depth of learning for your kids, and also just a greater depth of, I guess we'll call it, personal insight into who they are as young writers? You can put that in the question panel. How many of you do something like this, or feel like you could possibly go ahead and take this into your classroom immediately with some of the current work that your kids have been writing and maybe extend those lessons? Just fill that in. And I can't see if you're doing that, but.
Yep, I'm monitoring the questions panel, but I'm even seeing this as like, you got your little you've got your cafe, and then you have maybe like an area where you have a little bit of a stage and somebody's presenting something.
I love that.
It could be the publishing step of the writing process if you're talking about writing, or maybe they're presenting an enrichment project that they were doing. So and you have your audience there, and it makes you feel like maybe you're an actor or you're just on stage. And being on stage, you know, David, better than I do. Yeah, it brings up the butterflies, but also it feels super empowering to get up there and present what you know. So I say give the kids the opportunity to do the same thing.
Right, because this probably wouldn't work for every personality in your classroom. I would not. I don't think I would impose this upon every child, but you already know your kids. You know them very well, and if there are some you can tell that they do need to maybe push outside of their own bubble a little bit, this would be a beautiful way to extend that lesson. Now, also, Kimberly, and I don't know if we have a lot of time to talk about a lot of the details for discovery time, but if you go to the slide where we talk about the clue plates, this used to be something we had available to us, and I love it. I think it's a really good idea, but it does give you maybe a little bit more of a rigid guideline, and you just have to be aware that as you are extending your lessons and enriching your lessons, not every learner is, they're not traveling at the same rate of speed. And sometimes they need a little bit more guidance, sometimes a little bit less. Again, that's one of those things you get to know as the professional in the classroom. But this can be a fantastic way to help guide the ones that maybe are a little more reluctant, and it really pushes them into areas to think that they might not have gone before.
Yeah.
And do you want to talk about these specifically?
Yeah,
or,
sure.
Okay.
I'll briefly go through what the clue plates are. So the clue plates, obviously they're like license plates. So in this specific grade level, they're traveling around the United States. And so each one of these clues is going to align with one of the states in the United States. So the easiest one for me to look at is clue number 2. Okay, so it gives you, it says, if I can read it here, a delicious delicacy hails from this state. The main ingredient of this tasty cuisine is a diamondback rattlesnake. And I'll stop there because I think we all know what state this probably comes from. And then it asks you some different questions. Which state brags about this unusual appetizer, and which states border this state? So what this discovery time activity is going to do is ask you to do a little bit of research. And so notice, this is not huge research that we're asking them to do, but we're asking them to find the state and then also find which states border that state. And then from here on, from the next part of the activity gives them some different activities that they could do, like making rattlesnake bites, which are just like chicken nugget bites or something, but it gives them an activity to do at home with their family. And so each different clue and clue plate will pertain to a state, and then it just delves into some of the history, some fun facts about each state. So this is a really, really fun discovery time activity. This would be easy to create. I mean, sure. It would be time consuming, but take part of your summer and work on the enrichment piece that you want to add to your classroom. This one's covering social studies, geography. The clue number 1, I think it's very challenging for me to read. I'm not sure. I'm not even going to try. But yeah, it's about having them travel around and explore. So, will you go to the next slide? Okay.
No,
so
which one is that?
Yeah, this one is on. This is the extension of that clue plate. So if you look at activity number 2, you can see Arizona was the answer. All right, and then there's the recipe for the diamondback rattlesnake bites that they can do. It also gives some information about Arizona, and And sorry about those snakes. I don't like snakes, but yeah, this is impactful. I mean, who knows? Somebody might say, I love snakes, and I want to do some research on the rattlesnake. And so this could veer off into many different directions. So yeah, I really like these clue plates for that reason.
Oh, I love that. And Kimberly, I had a thought just now because you made the comment, you know, that, yeah, you didn't necessarily, you apologize if people saw the snake. And I would say, well, there are some who like snakes, but I would also like to suggest that this is part of where you extend the lesson and you do it through conversation in your classrooms. And I hope all of you are doing that with kids. And I don't care what grade you're teaching. Every grade level can have an enriched conversation about something like this, because I immediately thought, oh, but you know, there are some people who would say, well, I don't think it's right to kill a snake. It's not okay to do that. And I would love to hear a kid's opinion about that. And then I'd love to hear the teacher say, well, now hold on. Let's see. Let's remember we don't all have the same opinions about things. And how do we come together with some level of consensus about what we do agree upon? Do you see where that would go? That is so good for kids. And folks, you better deal with this. But we have a lot of kids who can't talk in the classrooms very easily anymore, and they won't. They won't. And it's because we've gone through, you know, we all know what we've been through. I don't even want to say the word, but we've all been through it. And we know what happened to teachers and kids when we weren't doing what we normally do. And now here we are, we're back in the swing of things, but we have a bunch of kids now. They don't necessarily know how to talk intelligently about anything because it's too risky for them. And so one of the things you have to remember is that as you're seeking to extend lessons, as you're seeking to enrich, to get kids to use the concepts they now know and then start to really apply them to real world issues, they have to be able to talk about it. And of course, we all know that that's going to be really hard for some kids. But if you have something like this to use as your springboard into that extension, there's a better than likely chance that the kids will find some level of interest in it and might have something to say. And by golly, if you can get them to say something important that shows what they're thinking and how they operate and how they push through the world a little bit, that is such an invaluable trait that we would be helping to build into our kids. And so, yes, it all starts with being novel. It all starts with, you know, extending lessons and also enriching lessons. But do you see that you don't necessarily have to differentiate the instruction on your own? Because if you can get your kids talking, get it up and out of them, you now have a map for where you would take those lessons. And yes, you're still the teacher. I'm not saying that you're relinquishing all of your power. I am saying that you don't have to think of all of it on your own to figure out how to implement it, because your kids, once you get them thinking, once they're engaged, they are going to be the roadmap to show you what to do next and what they need you to do next. I could see so many ways that this would jump into a lot of different arenas. And I think I talked about this, oh golly, it's been a while, about 360-degree teaching. And obviously, those kinds of ideas pop right out to me. First of all, you are dealing with geography. You are dealing with culture. You are dealing with sociology. You are dealing with psychology. You are working with kids in a lot of different areas of their thinking that they may never have explored before. Now, if you think that's risky, yes, you are right. But I can't imagine having a more excited time in the classroom than when you and your kids are engaged and involved in these kinds of discoveries. Super, super important stuff. Okay, I'm looking at our time, Kimberly. We don't have a lot of time. What do we want to talk about next? Moving. All right. How about let's just go to let's just start talking about
this quickly.
Okay, do that.
The Winter Wonderland tour. I can go over that.
Yeah, do that. Yeah, do that.
Yeah. So this winter, I called it the Winter Wonderland tour, but this discovery time activity, notice there's a passport. Okay, so their discovery time activities had to do with different discovery destinations. And Quigley is our mascot. He's the little redheaded dude that you see pop up here and there. We love Quigley. So these are called Quigley's Quests. Okay, so they give you some information,
Okay.
and all of these had to do with very cold or very northern countries.
Nordic.
So you've got,
Yeah.
yeah, you can see where we're at here.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So it gives
Oh,
them an
Switzerland.
idea to research, do a little bit of research. It gives them some information, but then they get to choose one of Quigley's quests to complete. Now,
Oh,
one might
fun.
say, you know, you are, I don't know, you're in, I live in Cape Canaveral, so everything's about rocket science and spaceships
Right.
and
That's
stars
okay.
and everything.
That's
So
okay.
I'm seeing the northern lights, and maybe one of Quigley's quests was to learn about the northern lights, create a diorama about the northern lights, draw a picture, you know, do something like that. So it's going to ask them to do something that has to do with writing, and then possibly something else, maybe that hits like the artistic realm, but this is where you can allow the students to be free and
Oh,
let
yeah.
them bring in their own knowledge and their own creativity. Wouldn't it be wonderful for your students to say, you know what, I like this quest, but can I add this to it? Or could I possibly do this instead? Because then they're working with their brain, their little spaghetti brain or waffle brain or whatever it is, but they're getting into thinking. They're thinking about thinking and thinking about creating something different, creating it to be more novel for them. So,
And you just defined how kids do that. You just defined how kids extend the lesson. They are the natural guideposts for that kind of thing. Sorry to interrupt, but I just thought, that's exactly what I think we've got to get to.
Yeah, and that's what David is saying. That's what we want to talk about and really drive home is that. But you have to create the atmosphere for them to do that, for them to converse and start throwing ideas around, because that is magic. That is magic in the classroom. And all you have to do is set up the environment for them to do so. Add a couple of activities like this and see what happens. Take that risk.
Yes. Well, back in my student teaching days, I remember I absolutely loathed the textbook we were using. I can't remember what it was. It was really, really old back then. It was so out of date, and unfortunately our school did not have a lot of funding at that time to replace the books, but it was like the social studies book. And what I did is, since we had to do a study on Hawaii and Alaska as the last two states that were brought into the Union, and I thought, well, okay, that's good, but what could I do to extend this, to make it more immersive? And I like that word. I wish we would have added that word to our whole talk, because kids thrive in immersive situations. And what I decided to do is turn my classroom into Hawaii. And I made palm trees that went from the floor to the ceiling, and we had a luau, and we made poi, and we made lays. What else did we do? We did all of these things. Now, yes, that's all sort of like, okay, that's fun and that's hypey, but was it rich? And I'll tell you where the richness came. It came in the fact that as kids were looking at the various things that I brought into the classroom, I would also ask them, well, in our study of Hawaii, what else would we have done? What else would we include in our environment here? What's going to make it real or authentic, since we're not really there? How can we add more to it? And you know what those kids started to do? And by the way, these were third graders. They began to research it on their own. The next time they had a chance to go to the library in the school, they all wanted to find books about Polynesian culture and Hawaii. It was amazing. Why was that so? Yeah, why was it magical for them? I did provide the environment, but what I was doing is I was tapping into them. I wanted to find out where do you want to take this? And again, if there was one thing I could leave with anybody today, it's please do extend your lessons, do enrich your lessons, use novelty to help get that approach started in your classroom. but you don't have to be the Lord and Master over all of it. You don't even have to be the expert of it. Encourage kids to start being the expert, and it's just phenomenal what will happen. Excuse me. Could we go to, I'd like to talk about differentiated instruction in maybe a little bit purer form, because that is maybe a little confusing to some teachers as we talk about it. It's not just teach it differently. It's more about how does your kid learn? And in this case, how do your kids learn? And if you go down to the one that talks about bodily kinesthetic and differentiation, now you're going to know that these are also going to deal a little bit with the multiple intelligences. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. I hope all of you will research that just a tad little bit. But notice here, just the picture I have here of kids, they built this. Now, they may not have been given specific instructions how to do it, and that's why it's magical. There are certain kids in our classrooms, and of course you can see in the background STEM. I'm a great proponent of STEM and STEAM and every kind of acronym that has something to do with developing kids' brains to start thinking like this. And of course you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with Shurley English? Everything. It has everything to do with it, because I also want kids to have a point of accountability where they are writing and reporting, where they're making discoveries and making that information available to other people, like their teachers and their parents and their siblings. You know what is amazing, remarkable stuff? When kids go home at the end of the day and you don't have to ask, what are you learning in school? Because they can't shut up about it. And it's because you're hitting them in an area of differentiation and instruction that really hands a lot of that power over to them within controls, within limits. Now, again, let's go to the next one. I love this. For all of you who ever like to, just fiddle around with visuals, we almost all deal with kids who are visual learners. I would say that probably 80 to 90% of our kids are going to be visual learners, and they stay that way for quite a while. Of course, we want to expand their auditory channels, but this is such a great way to make it visual, and it's also mathematical. It also deals with spatial understandings of things, and there's no big deal here. It's just our gallon guy, and when you're trying to get kids to learn things in math, when you're trying to get them to do that, obviously you're going to teach them the terminology, but very seldom do they really understand the quantities, and they really need to do it. I can remember back in the day, I used to have to take here in Missouri, maybe it was everywhere, I don't remember, but it was called the BEST test, Basic Essential Skills Test. And I thought it was the most incredible assessment. I never, ever, ever understood test fear. I never did. And I think it's because the groundwork had been laid for me that I wanted to be able to be tested. I wanted to be ready so that I could be assessed. And I was pretty confident as a kid. And so I had to actually measure out how many cups in a pint, how many pints in a quart, how many quarts in a gallon. And we literally did it with water. And that's how you got assessed. And I thought, somebody was barking up the right tree back in the day. Now, do we have is it really feasible to do that all the time now? No. But boy, it's really extraordinary teaching and learning when you get to do those kinds of things. And also, let's look at the next one. For auditory learners, I don't want to leave anybody out. Obviously, if you have the money, you have the equipment. I hope a lot of schools have this, but a listening lab is fantastic. It's such a wonderful way to enrich a lesson, to extend a lesson, because we have to recognize that not everybody is a visual learner. Not everybody wants to get their hands dirty, but almost everybody has to be able to learn through auditory channels, don't they? Isn't that primarily how we impart information to our kids? Now, today we're talking about ways to maybe make it a little bit more than that. And obviously, if we don't do that, I would just say maybe we're missing the mark a little bit. We better be thinking about this. And Kimberly, do you have it? You can just jump right in there with anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I'm a proponent of, and we talked about this the last time, creating centers, and you can have you can create centers and differentiate for all different types of learners when you do that. So yeah, I'm a huge proponent of it. I know it takes a lot of work, but it's worth it. It's worth to see. It's worth it to see your kids working together. It's worth it to see them, working in the capacity where they feel empowered to be by themselves, and they can read step-by-step instructions, and they can go here and here, and you're over here working with somebody else, but the whole machine is running, and you're a part of it, but you're not running the machine. It's running because of what you've already established, and within that you can differentiate.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Can we go to the Shurley change-ups? Because again, this is kind of a culmination of some of what we've been talking about all along. And I do want to try to bring us back to where does Shurley fit into this? Because obviously, we're Shurley English, and we certainly want you to experience Shurley English. But what we also want you to understand that it can be the springboard we're talking about to get your brain and the brains of your children really moving in a direction that makes lesson extensions easy to do and makes enrichment just a natural part of the regular lesson. And that when you differentiate your instruction, you're not having to think so hard about it because you are letting your kids be the guide. I want to talk about these ideas here, how they reflect directly on Shurley English and how we do what we do. So one of the things that I always feel is important, and I would do this right off the bat in the very early part of the year, is to get to know your kids and give them interest inventory sheets. And I think that's where this all starts. You've got to know your kids. You've got to know what they're experts about. And you also have to know where they're vulnerable and where some of those weak spots might be, because those are the areas we really want to help them to start to focus on. And of course, here's just an idea. All of you probably do this already, but don't forget your sticky notes. Every teacher desk probably has about 14 different pads of it. And if you're not, then I feel sad for you. You need to go to the teacher store and get some. But sticky notes, my goodness, for younger kids, you can do these for letter recognition. Every kid can learn how to identify a letter, call it by its name, and stick that sticky note in an order on their tables or on their desks or wherever, on the wall. And that's just one idea for younger kids. But if you're an older kid, revision skills. I love doing this with my fourth graders. I think I might have even done this with some 7th and 8th graders, where when it came to the writing process and we got to that point of revision, and where do you think is probably one of the hardest places to get kids to really notice things about their writing? Which phase do you think is probably more challenging than others? I already cheated. It's the revision skills. Why? Because kids still may not have a very wide vocabulary and their spelling skills may not be up to par. Well, if that's true, then sticky notes it was just a great way for me to have them read their piece of writing. And as they were reading it, I always made sure they had a pencil in their hand, and I would ask them, listen, if you come across a word you think you might have misspelled, would you just go ahead and circle it as we go through here? And you know what they would do? They almost always got it. They could always tell when they had misspelled a word. They didn't always know what the right spelling was, but they could tell when they misspelled it. So I'd have them circle those, and then on sticky notes, I would write the correct spelling, and then I would stick that on that paper, on that draft, and let them go back and fill in the correct word in the right place wherever it belonged in their writing. I didn't do that for every child. I did that for some kids who really needed some extra assistance in that revision step, and it took away some of the fear. And then eventually they began to figure out, I can do this on my own. And all through the magic of just a silly little sticky note. The next thing.
David, we're running out of time.
Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah.
Well.
Wrap it up.
All right.
Wrap it up.
Okay, let's go to the last one. Last slide for everybody. It's going to say comprehension differentiation. And this is super important. If you are currently working when you are trying to get kids to really comprehend text, and you're struggling because it's become same-o, same-o, here are some things to just bear in mind. You can, particularly if you have a student workbook, and kids have to read the question at the end of a reading and then write the answer on these blank lines, I'm going to suggest flip that around, turn it on its side, and have them read the questions first. Because what that's going to do is engage their brain to look more specifically in the reading the first time for the answer. Because they've already started thinking about where should that be? Where would it make sense to find that in this text? It's such a really great way of just flipping things around a little bit. It differentiates how you've approached it. The other thing to bear in mind is text to self, text to text, and text to world connections. That's more of the comprehension piece where you're asking kids, when did you find yourself in a situation like what you just read about? Or have you ever read another story or another article or another book that's very similar to what we just read? How do they compare? And also text to world. Is there something that is real world related that you can say that you know about, or maybe your family knows about, or something you've heard in the news, and that it relates to something you just read in one of your books? And then finally, Kimberly, if you want to just finish talking a little bit about journals, there's just probably no end to what journals can do.
Right. And nowadays, I journal on my phone. So journaling, because the writing gets to be a lot. And so I speak in my phone. I journal that way.
Cool.
Yeah. So one of my favorite teachers, I wrote a blog about this. I'm Shirley, we do have a blog that's well worth checking out. But Mrs. Riddle, she was my 6th grade teacher, and after lunch, she always had us journaling. But I see now why she was having us journal. She had us journal about things that we knew about. It was differentiated, so you never felt like you were wrong.
Right.
And
okay, gotcha.
She always commented on every person's journal entry for that day. And what I loved about it, what I realized was that that was her inventory, part of it. She was getting to know her students, us, through the journals that we were writing.
I love that.
So
I love that.
That made a huge
Kimberly,
impact on me.
I know that you have talked a little bit with me about that personally, and I think that's amazing. Again, it's a wonderful place to kind of stop our conversation, because we start with the kids, we end with the kids, and letting them be the guidepost to enriching lessons, extending those lessons, and also remembering that as instructors, you don't have to bear the lion's amount of thinking here. Right. Don't forget to tap into your richest resource, which is your kids.
Yeah.
Well, I think we are definitely out of time.
We are. And we've got our last Shurley English Teacher Talk for the year already, coming up April 14th. So we're going to be talking about the Cure for the Summer slide. So definitely don't miss that one. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I know.
Take care, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.